possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face.
Hello, everybody, and thanks again for tuning in. My name is Matt Kennedy, and you are watching the Ultra MK podcast, where together we are reversing the narrative. And today I'm out actually traveling in Southern California and doing some things with the ministry and with the Peace of Heaven and going into some meetings. But I did want to get on this episode today. I've been really looking forward to this episode for quite a while. Life is obviously busy for everybody, and we're all out there working jobs and paying bills, and just life is busy. But I've been anticipating this episode in particular because of our guest today and some of his background, and I wanted to also bring a return guest on who knows a little bit about the topics today. And I felt that it's really cool to be able to explore into some of the biblical history of what we perceive the world to be and not to be. And it's important in this new time that we're in to give everybody a voice, because I believe wholeheartedly in our Constitution and our First Amendment and our freedom of speech. And I think it's fair to give people their opportunity in order to talk about things that are near and dear to them, especially if they have context and they have reference points to pull from that really gets you to think about that topic. And so I'm really excited today to introduce you one of my newest friends, and I hope that he would be a return guest on the Ultra MK podcast. I'm just going to read just a brief bio about him, and pardon me if I get anything wrong. Please, John, you can always correct me on this. We're going for authenticity. So in the real world of authenticity, there's mistakes, and it's okay to make a mistake, and we learn from those things. So we have on our show today John Strazicich, who was born in Orange County, California in 1960. He lived most of his younger life in Anaheim, California. He went to Loara High School, and after graduation, he pursued ministry and received a bachelor's degree, master's, and PhD in biblical studies. His dissertation was published in Europe, and he taught in various schools after getting his terminal degree, and moved to Samoa, where he taught at Kanana Fao Theological Seminary as the chair of the Department of Biblical Studies for a number of years in the South Pacific, in Tafuna on the island of Tutuila in American Samoa. Coming back to the States, he taught at Bethesda University as the graduate dean. That school was run by Paul Yonggi Cho. Presently, he creates YouTube videos on various books of the Bible, biblical theology, exegesis, and hermeneutics. At the present, he is finishing up presentations on the book of Amos. For a number of years now, he has taken a passion for biblical cosmology, which at the present time causes concerns for some whose cosmology does not have any basis in the biblical text. He's had various radical visionary experiences and miraculous events that has happened in his earlier years, and that helped shape the direction of his life to the present. He's been happily married for 37 years to Renee, and they have three beautiful children, and they currently live in Texas. And I believe, and we'll bring it up on the screen, his looks like his dissertation that was published was called Joel's Use of Scripture and the Scripture's Use of Joel. Is that right, John?
Yeah, that's it.
It has a beautiful cover on it, and we'll make sure we bring it up on the screen for our viewers to see. It's a very, very well done, beautiful. It says appropriation and resignification in Second Temple Judaism and Early Christianity by John Strazicich. So John, Thanks for coming on today. Thanks for joining with Michael and I. And folks, if you're not familiar with who Michael Ware is, Michael Ware was on my very first episode of Ultra MK Podcast. And Michael has been involved in this Jefferson movement and the state of Jefferson for a while now, for quite a few years. And he and I had met in Washington, D.C., and that was in 2021. And ever since then, we've been connected and walking together in this awakening process. And I actually have a lot of credit to give to him. He's actually helped me understand our Lord and God and get closer to our Lord, and has shown me things that I hadn't realized before that makes me love Jesus even more. And so I'm just really thankful for Michael Ware. Michael is currently residing in Northern California as a self-employed pistachio farmer, and spends a lot of time out on his ranch, and also serving within ministry at the Church of Glad Tidings, and has done amazing things working with youth in his church and in the community. As his passion is working with the Gen Z generation, because he has a lot to contribute to that generation, and he sees how they've been targeted through different psychological operations and manipulation and many different things. And he does have a great perspective on the topics that we're going to go over today. So I felt it'd be great to introduce John and Michael together, and together we can really shine some lights on some subjects that may be a little controversial within the Christian church, but we're going to talk about everything today. So guys, thanks for joining with me.
Good to be here, Matt. Nice to meet you, John.
Yes, nice to meet you, Mike.
And so I really would like to just kind of start at the very beginning with you, John. When you when you were going to college and you decided to pick your majors, was there something in particular that really kind of like put you into that position? That is it something that you always kind of wanted to do as a young child, or was there some moment in time where you said, that's really what I want to focus on?
Well, this is actually a really a supernatural thing that led me to this, and some of it I didn't even know until it was all completely done. Now, Matt, I do know you do know my brother Mark, right?
Yeah, I love Mark.
Yeah, Mark's he's the best. Well, he told me after I graduated, getting my PhD, writing my dissertation, it all being published, he told me that my grandmother, she had fasted for like 40 days. And she told Mark about me. And he said that he would be a scholar and that he would write books or something like that. And so he told me that after, after everything had happened, or you follow me. And my grandmother told him that back probably in the late 60s. And then, I didn't get my PhD until 2004.
So John, in that time of your life, was the Jesus movement already happening in Southern California?
That's kind of when we grew up. I remember being at Chuck Smith's tent, when he had the tent before he started the church. With during the Jesus movement was a big part of it was centered in Costa Mesa with Chuck Smith, and so we were there for all of that. And we had attended Melodyland since we were in Anaheim. But we all, it wasn't until the 70s is when, as us as children began to grow, you have to then take the faith on. There's no grandchildren in the kingdom of God. There's only children, right? So it comes a time in your teens where you have to pick and choose where you're going to go, who you're going to serve. And so that, that was during the Jesus movement, and probably maybe tapering towards the end of it, when all of us kids were back on, on schedule with God. and determined to serve him. But what led me to do my PhD was, I had a series of visions that happened. I was I mean, it was so radical. I mean, I was struck by God's glory at night. It was August 15th, 87, and I went out to the strawberry field. It's now part of the parking lot at Disneyland. And I prayed to see God's glory because my brother-in-law, Mark Harris, who you ought to have on, Matthew, he would tell me that he would see the Shekinah glory at night on his ceiling. So I said, well, that's cool, Mark. I said, well, pray that something would happen to me. So I went out that night, August 15th, 89, about 11 o'clock at night, out in the middle of Strawberry Field, and I asked God to show his glory. And the whole sky, I mean, everything, into the stars, it was blue, green, yellow. And I turned around and circled. The whole sky was full of God's glorious colors. And then the colors swirled and a light beam came down and hit me right in my face. I fell to the ground. And my eyes were watering because I was blinded by, being struck by the glory. And then after that, it turned to tears. And after that, we had visions. We saw visions night and day for about 2 years, and it wasn't one or two, wasn't 100 or 200. It was all the time. And through those visions that we saw, I saw that it was always, like Old Testament imagery. Are you following me? That we would see. Like one of those visions, to give you an example, was we came into prayer one morning, 6 o'clock, Mark and I, and we walked into the church and it was pouring down rain, Matthew. It was pouring down so hard. You couldn't see the other side of the building, but it wasn't water, but it was like spiritual rain, and it was forming pools of water. And Mark goes, John, what do we do? I said, Mark, we just lay down in this and we soak it all up, as much of this as we can get. And so after having been struck by glory, literally fell to the ground. That set me to say, I need to study the Bible. And I want to do this, in the original languages. So it set me on my path to get my PhD. And I did that. I went to Claremont, did all 42 units of my PhD work there in Old Testament. And then God gave me a dream, another radical dream. And so I moved to Fuller Seminary, where I ended up basically redoing a PhD in biblical studies. And it was published. And in fact, my outside reader for my dissertation was my old professor at Claremont. Because when I told him I needed to leave the school, he goes, "No, you're not." He did. I was like one of his favorite students, but so when I finished my dissertation, Leslie Allen was one of my the professors there that oversaw my dissertation at Fuller Seminary. He goes, "Well, who would you like your outside reader to be?" And I said, "Well, James Sanders, at Claremont." And he goes, "You can't do that, John." He goes, "You left there." And I go, "Well," I told him, I said, "Leslie, I didn't leave on bad terms. He didn't want me to leave." I said, "Yeah, I want James Sanders to be I would like him to be my outside reader." So he allowed him to, and my dissertation ended up being published in Europe. Wow. With E.J. Brill. And it's the oldest publishing house in the world. Started in like 16 something. But anyhow, that's what led me to pursue a PhD, was all these visionary experiences, because the visions we saw were Old and New Testament imagery. And I said, well, this is where it's at. And so, so that led me to where I'm at today.
And from what I understand, you are extremely fluent in speaking, reading, and writing Hebrew?
Well, I mean, I can read it. I may not be the best. My pronunciation may not be the best. When you go to school here in the States, you just learn Hebrew as a reading language. Are you follow me? So, I mean, I can pick it up and read it, but you know, um, I don't know. Another reader from Israel would have a much better pronunciation than myself.
Sure. I'm sure
Yeah,
that if
yeah,
God were to pick you up and plant you in Israel, I'm sure you'd get along just fine. But your pronunciations and your dialect would probably sharpen up. Yeah, I'd imagine.
yeah.
Um, and so you then ended up in in Samoa.
Yeah,
How did
after
you
I
get that
graduated.
opportunity? Yeah.
Yeah, after I graduated, I put out, my CV, to various places, and the only place that came up was American Samoa. So I grew up surfing my whole life, and I said, well, this would be great, and I thought it'd be a good experience for the kids that when they get older, they could, they would have they lived, in a foreign country basically. American Samoa, it's a territory of the United States, but I remember we went to villages where the kids would come up to the family, and they'd want to touch our skin because we were white, and they'd never seen a white person in their village before. So
Wow.
it was. And anyhow, so I taught you know I taught there at that seminary for about 3 years.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. And I'd really like to kind of jump in more into some of the education that you've been teaching at some of these schools and how you kind of got to that point and position. And can you tell us about those opportunities of you teaching as a professor, and then maybe segue into some of the controversies that you've faced?
Sure. Well, when I went down to American Samoa, that's kind of when I really started studying a little bit more on Hebrew poetics, and really my class there on Psalms kind of like threw me into that. And so I really kind of developed a love for Hebrew poetry, um, in the Hebrew Bible, and and then that grew, it grows into the all of the prophetic material. I mean, almost 1/3 of the Hebrew Bible is written in poetry. People may not know that, but and so that was something that was a very at the heart of my I guess my studies in the Hebrew Bible was is Hebrew poetry. And like I'm working through Amos, and it's pretty much 95% of, not more than that, 98% of the whole book of Amos is written in Hebrew poetry. That would be a topic for another session. But um, I guess at my what's led me here today to where I'm at. Um, I'm no longer teaching at Bethesda University, and that was just simply because sometimes we get involved in either churches or parachurch organizations, and sometimes we just see things that going on that are not kosher. Are you following me? And you
Oh
make some
yeah.
observations, and so basically, um, there were just some, um, as my wife and I perceived it to be, some very, very immoral things that were going on. Not just differences of opinion. We're talking, something, very, very um, ugly. And so I just told him basically I couldn't be a part of it, you know, and basically that led to, when my contract ended up, I was no longer, teaching it at the school. So and that's fine. It's some, you have to pay. There's a price to pay when you're when you're just living your life. And but God sees the big picture, Matthew. and so we live and learn, and we just move through life. And as long as you have a good conscience and you can sleep at night, that's more precious than anything, Matthew. More precious than anything, Matthew, is that you can sleep at night and know and rest in the knowledge of God that your soul is intact. That's,
Amen.
that's
So
that's
important.
kind of where it was at. Yeah.
There's probably so many people out there that have sleepless nights because they just have a hard time grasping that view and that principle. And that's so important. You have to stand on what's right, and you have to sleep at night. I get it. I totally understand. Michael would understand too.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of jump right into from your studies here, and what the Bible shows and reveals as far as biblical cosmology. And I understand that you have some like 10 famous questions that you would like to ask people sometimes in discussions and forums that help kind of open that up. And is that and I do have some slides and I have some things to reference, but yeah, how can we start with this?
Okay, well, why don't you go to the very last the picture I gave you of my former professor at Claremont, Tammy
Okay, I'm gonna
Schneider.
go ahead
It's the
and
very last. I'll just start my story there, because it's pretty hard for someone like myself to even entertain the idea of believing in flat Earth. And because I had left academia, um, I had a person come up to me, and because my contract was not renewed, um, and so I've gone into other business ventures, and about 2 years after this event, after I left, a guy came up to me who happened to be a flat earther, and he challenged me, and he was going through the Bible, uh, using scriptures that I all knew that we just kind of dismissed. But when he came to the topic of the Nile River, and he told me that the Nile River proves the earth is flat. And when he said that, I was jolted. And the reason why I want to show you this picture of Dr. Tammy Schneider is because when he said that, it brought back a memory to me. Now, this goes back to like 1994, 95. I can't remember the year of the class that I took. And we were studying in that particular class ancient Egypt. And Dr. Schneider was quoting Herodotus that Egypt is the gift of the Nile, and because without the Nile River, there's no Egypt. And then she was talking about the topography of Egypt, that lower Egypt is northern Egypt and upper Egypt is southern Egypt. And she said it's like counterintuitive, to our thinking, because the river's flowing from the south going north. And right after she said that, she grabbed her hair, and you can see, Matt, she's got a lot of hair, right? And she grabbed her hair with both of her hands on either side of her head, and she screamed, and she pulled her hair, and she screamed so loud that it was at the top of your lungs, like somebody was dying. People would have ran into the class from outside if they would have heard it. And she said, "No, no, no." And she said this like 3 times, and we were all freaking out. I mean, the whole class was freaking out, because we had, here she, one moment she's teaching, and the next moment she's like having a nervous breakdown, and then the redhead in the class, said, "Well, Dr. Snyder, what's going on? What's what's going on?" And she goes, "Well, I was just there. I was just there this summer at Lake Victoria." And she goes, the Nile River starts at Lake Victoria. I was there in Uganda, this past summer with my colleagues. And she said, the river starts on the equator. And she said, it's impossible. It's impossible. And then the class, I mean, it just shut down the whole class. I mean,
Wow.
it was over with that, and then finally, 10 minutes later, whatever it was, one of the guys in the class said, well, look, Dr. Snyder, we're, you know, we're not geophysicists. Maybe there's a scientific reason for this, but can we just move on with the class? This is a history class. We're not scientists. And so with that, everything went on. No one ever talked about it again. It never came up. And I forgot about it. Never even thought about it. Never thought about it. And then 20 years later, when this guy told me about the Nile River, it sparked this memory of Dr. Schneider when she grabbed her hair. And so when he said this, I just, obviously it's like, well, John, you need to look into this. There's something's going on here because, because back then in '94 there were no flat earthers. No one even entertained the idea. No one, not even, she said it was impossible, but no one, you know, took it seriously. Are you following me?
Yeah.
And so, but when you do look into the Nile River, yeah, it's impossible that the Earth is a sphere because, all you have to do is just type in Alexandria, Egypt. Any of your listeners, anyone listening, go on Google, type in what is the latitude of Alexandria, Egypt. It's 31.2 degrees latitude north. Now I live in Texas. That's the same latitude as Temple, Texas, an hour north of Austin, the capital of Texas. And so if you just slid the Nile River to Texas, it would start in Ecuador. I mean, if there was land all down there, and it would flow downhill all the way to Temple, Texas. In fact, Temple, Texas is exactly as far north as, it's 31.1 degrees latitude north. So it's not quite as far as north, but somewhere in between there and Waco. And so if you're let's say you're at Temple, Texas, you got to walk uphill, Matthew, to get to the equator. Now you can't do that on a spherical Earth. And no one can, I've asked hundreds of people. There is no one's ever, you can't explain this. Okay. It's impossible because if you're in the Northern Hemisphere and you walk in an upward trajectory, Matthew, you will never leave the Northern Hemisphere. Okay. Let alone make it to the equator. So, so this led me into like, oh my gosh, I got to look into this. I started actually feeling ashamed of myself because I taught the book of Genesis. I considered myself very conservative, and I had just found out that everybody made an accommodation, no matter how conservative you were or are. Everyone made an accommodation for NASA's cosmology. And no one ever questioned
it. Yeah.
anything because why? Well, because, the universities control knowledge, right? The media controls knowledge, right? So once you understand the deep state, well, what does the deep state run? Well, they run governments, by people like Epstein, right? They blackmail them to get them to do what they want. So they run governments of the world. They run education, universities, and the media they own, and government-sponsored science. And so that's how the narrative is controlled, those four corners of lies. Again, that's, governments, media, education, and government-sponsored science. And
Well, even just like, even just the word universities, universes and universities. It's interesting how they use certain words to program the minds.
well, you know what the word universe actually comes from? It's Latin, ultimately. And it just means one turn. And what they mean by that is it's basically talking about the whatever's here, all of creation, right? Or the whole cosmos, the whole thing together. That's what the word universe is means. It comes from two Latin words. But the universe in the Bible, Matthew, is actually would be terrifying to you if you actually knew what it was. The universe is tripartite. It's the heavens, the earth, and the seas. And it also has Sheol underneath the earth. But the earth is tripartite. The universe in the Bible is tripartite. Do you remember Peter? In the book of Second Peter, he said he was talking about those who were mocking the second coming, and he said that like the earth of old, right? It stands in and out of water, right? Well, when you think about that, when you think about what Peter said, the earth stands in and out of water. That's Second Peter chapter 3, verse 5. That when you think of the earth, Matthew, or I think of the earth, we think of a globe, right? We think of the a spherical earth, right? But Peter had that thought was not in his mind. He said the earth stands in and out of water because Peter's thinking of Genesis chapter 1, right, on the third day, that it said, let all the waters below the firmament be gathered to one place, and let the dry land appear. And he called the dry land earth, and the gathering of the waters he called seas. So when Peter said the earth stands in and out of water, the earth to Peter is nothing but dry ground. And that's very, very biblical. And you'll see this tripartite mention of the heavens, earth, and seas in all the prayers of the Old Testament. You start looking up heaven, earth, and seas in the book of Revelation. It's mentioned at least 5 times just in that book. And then remember, like in chapter 4 of Acts, when the house shook, right? They prayed to God who created the heavens, the earth, and the sea. So this is very well known to Hebrew scholars that the universe in the Hebrew Bible is tripartite: the heavens, the earth, and the seas, and they are very different from one another. That's why the earth can stand in and out of water. And the earth, he's not picturing a globe in his mind. Because he called the dry land, he called earth. And the gathering of the waters, he called seas. So there's very separate. There's heaven, the earth, and the seas. And so, so going back to biblical cosmology, you have to go back there to Genesis. And you have on the second day the firmament being made. And so the firmament, remember, where did God put the sun, moon, and stars? Inside of the firmament. That's where God put the sun, moon, and stars, and they're inside of it. Why? Because the sun and the moon and the stars are at different heights within our visible, the heavens above us, within the blue sky. And everything in the Bible is within the blue sky. There's whatever is above the blue sky is heaven, and above that is the sea of glass with God's throne upon it. And so when you start actually reading the Bible, when you read Genesis chapter 1, the firmament is actually something it means something hard. Because when you go to the book of Ezekiel, for instance, remember Ezekiel had the vision of the cherubim, right? And he's with the 4 heads, they were blockheads, right? And they're they're basically a wheeled chariot upon which God's throne is sitting above. But it says there in chapter 1, verse 22, above the heads of the cherubim was a firmament like unto terrible crystal, or you could translate it kerok, terrible ice. And then above, on top of the firmament itself, it was God's throne, and he saw God sitting upon it and a rainbow about God. Well, that's the same image where John was called up to heaven, and the door was open, and he went up to heaven, and what did he see? A sea of glass and a throne, and an emerald rainbow about God. So, because remember that the waters of day one were divided in half on day two, and the half of the waters went above the firmament, and the other half of the waters were below the firmament. And that's why, like in Psalm 148, verse 4, it says, "Praise him, you waters which are above the heavens." And so, above the blue sky is the firmament. And we know that from Daniel chapter 12, verse 3. And when you compare that to Exodus 24:10, the firmament is the blue sky. If you just want to look at even at Exodus 24:10, that will tell you itself that the sky is blue, because it compares the blue sky to the color of the lapis lazuli, or the sapphire stone pavement underneath the feet of God. That's what is referenced there in Exodus chapter 24, verse 10. So that's very, it's once you understand that, and then inside of the firmament, because like during the daytime, if you ever see the sun or moon, it's blue behind the moon and behind the sun. So, and all the stars are inside of the blue. There's nothing beyond the blue, and the blue comes down and attaches itself to the earth. And that is told to us in Amos. I just did a whole thing on it. Amos chapter 9, verse 6. If you go there in your Bibles, you'll see that God attached to the earth. He founded on the earth his vaulted dome. So his firmament comes down, it's attached to the earth, and we would, if you look in those pictures that I gave you of the flat earth, you might want to throw that up. Yeah, you can see that the flat earth, that is the flat earth map there on your on the left side of the screen, and then on the right side of the screen is the UN logo, and you will see that it's hiding in plain sight. This is the earth. This is the earth as we know it, and the very center of the earth is the North Pole. You still have the tropics. You have the Tropic of Cancer, the equator, Tropic of Capricorn in the south, and just like the sun never goes north of the Tropic of Cancer, and likewise, it never goes south of the Tropic of Capricorn. So that's why it's always frozen at the North Pole. And on the flat Earth map, that white thing out there, that is all of what we would call Antarctica. And the dome comes down and is attached directly to the Earth. And that's what is stated in Amos chapter 9, verse 6. And it's founded upon the earth. And this is just, this is biblical cosmology. When I went to school in our graduate classes, we were all taught Hebrew cosmology. So none of this is wasn't new to me. No one actually believed it. We just accepted whatever NASA was doing. And every pastor every pastor is basically going to believe in the earth as we were taught it in school, because they've never been challenged with this, and they just simply are deceived, like all of us were deceived. We're no different, and I was no different, even as a scholar in in the Old Testament, biblical studies. I knew about, Hebrew cosmology, but no one believed it. But, after 9/11 kind of woke all of us up, we started to thinking, outside of the box. And, I have come to find out that, just reading the scripture, maybe you could put up there the Psalm 19. Maybe you can put that up on the screen now. Because this is gonna, if you're having trouble with this, right there, go right there, Psalm 19, perfect, right there. Now, what this says is it begins off here, Lamnat Zayak Mitzmor Lidavi. That's just the title of the psalm. It says to the choir master, a psalm of David. So in verse 2 in the Hebrew Bible is your verse 1 in your English Bibles. And you know, I'm not gonna, I don't want to bother you, but I'll just translate it from here. It says the heavens are reporting or enumerating the glory of God. That's line A. And then line B is, and the firmament declares the works of his hands. Now get this, day to day bubbles forth speech. Night to night declares knowledge. So this is telling you that when you look, you know, at the heavens or the firmament, that, you know, by day and by night, we know that there's a creator because of creation. This is what Paul said in Romans 1, right? So that the heavens, you know, God's creation is telling us of his glory, and they're telling us of the works of his hands. Okay. And so it says, you know, so it's 24/7, day to day, bubbles forth speech, night to night knowledge. Okay, so it's 24/7 education. Now you go down to verse 3, there is no speech, there are no words. Beli nishma kolam, where their voice is not heard. Now it says their line, you know, that's in the Hebrew text, but you're in the Septuagint and in Paul's quotation of this verse, it should read kolam instead of kavam. But anyhow, it just says, and their line goes out in all the earth, or their voice goes out in all the earth. Their words are to the end of the world. Now this is the very, very important part. In them, he pitched a tent for the sun. So this is our little lesson here today, a Bible lesson. When you get to the word in them, and this is going to be in your verse 4, at the end of verse 4 for you, you have to understand what is them. In them, he pitched a tent. What is the them? Well, you got to go back to verse 3. There are no words. There is no speech, or there are no words where their voice is not heard. Now, their voice, that word their voice, okay, refers back to the heavens. You know, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament declares the works of his hands. Okay, day to day bubbles forth speech, night to night knowledge. So all this knowledge is accumulated in observing the heavens and the firmament. Okay, and so when it says there is no speech, there are no words where their voice is not heard, it's the voice of creation speaking to you. Okay, now follow along in the next verse. Their line or their voice goes out into all the world. So what's there? Well, whose voice are we talking about? It's the voice of creation in the form of the heavens and the firmament. And again, you know, their words are at the end of the world. Okay, so again, there refers all the way back to the heavens and the firmament. Now, this is where it all gets tied together in verse 4 for you. At the end of maybe, yeah, at the end of verse 4 for you. In them, he pitched a tent for the sun. So in them means in the heavens and in the firmament. So the sun is inside of a tent. Okay, and this is what Dave is inside of a tent, along with the moon and the stars. We all live in this tent. And he says this, talking about the tent in verse 5, he is as a bridegroom going forth from his canopy, rejoicing like a strong man to run a race. So he's talking about the sun. The sun is what's moving. The earth isn't spinning. The sun is what's moving. Okay. And then he says, its going forth is from one end of the heaven, its circuit, it's tekufato. Utekufato all tetzotam. Okay. And its circuit to the other end. So the sun is on a circuit. It is in orbit, going in circles above the earth. And it says, lastly, and there's nothing hidden from its heat. So it ends this way. So by means of, you know, metaphor, he pitched, for the sun, he pitched a tent for the sun to dwell in. Okay. And then he's as a bridegroom going forth from his chamber. He's like a strong man to run a race. These are similes. And then phenomenological language is going forth is from one end of the heaven, its circuit to the other end, and there's nothing hidden from its heat. So David's telling us the sun is what's moving. And we know from, Paul, all scripture is inspired by God, is profitable for doctrine. And, the next verse says, the what is it? The law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul, and the precepts of the Lord, are making wise the simple. And it goes on and on into more of the praise for the law. But just as much as, verse 7, is, in your Bibles, or, verse 6, whatever it is in the English rendition, that, we're going to attribute, inspiration, that of course the law of the Lord, is perfect, restoring the soul. Well, just as much as that's inspired, the previous verse is inspired, that the sun is moving on a circuit, going around in circles above the earth. And we can see it's going forth from one end of the heaven, its circuit to the other end. So David is telling us in no uncertain terms that the earth is not spinning, the sun is what's moving. And this is what Joshua told us, the sun stood still and so did the moon. And, and Joshua chapter 10, verse 12. So once you start looking at the biblical record, the sun is what's moving. And there's no way to get past Psalm 19. All scripture is inspired and is profitable for doctrine. So if you can make doctrine off of this. And so and this is actually what we observe. We observe the sun moving, the stars moving, and the moon moving. This is what we see moving. The earth doesn't move.
Yeah.
One time it moves in California, and we grew up, is an earthquake, So that's kind of what, I just wanted to, for today, I just wanted to, to look at Psalm 19, and it's impossible to reverse these words, but this is the important part. Why did David say that he pitched a tent for the sun? And why did he make Hebrew parallelism between, in verse 1, the heavens declared the glory of God and the firmament shows the works of his hands? Because back in Genesis 1:8, it says, Vayikra Elohim La Rakia Shemayim. And God called the Rakia, that is the firmament, heaven. So you probably didn't know this, but you probably just forgot it, that God called the firmament heaven. So the word for heaven is another word for the firmament. So this is why they're used in Hebrew parallelism here. And the reason why it's a tent is because on day 4, God put inside of the firmament the sun, moon, and stars. And you can see, like, the blue sky forms a tent. And this is what Isaiah chapter 40, verse 22 says, that it says there that, he looks down upon the earth. He sits upon the vault of heaven, or the circle of the earth, the vault of heaven. He's looking down, and we look like grasshoppers. And he says he spreads out a garment like a curtain, and he spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. And so we all dwell in a tent, which is the blue sky. Because when you look out, the blue sky forms a bubble above your head, and it just goes down to the horizon. And so I'm sorry to tell you, but we've been lied to. But the universe, we live inside of this bubble of the blue sky on the earth, and biblical cosmology is the heavens, the earth, and the sea. And we know that Sheol is below it. But that's biblical cosmology. And I just happened to choose to, believe the Bible. And one other thing, show Matthew, show up the pictures of the Earth. These are pictures that NASA has given to us and says that they are pictures of the Earth. Okay, now look at the one on your left, okay, where you see North America and Mexico, right? Okay. If you look critically at, these are NASA's pictures, okay? It's nighttime in Canada. You can't even see the Great Lakes on this. You can pull this is involved. You can just pull this up yourself on your own computer off the internet. It's all from NASA. But if you look at this picture, you cannot fit in the northern hemisphere Russia. Russia today has 11 time zones. So even the width of the United States is like 2,700 miles from California to the East Coast. Now to go from the East Coast to London is further than the United States is wide. Or to go from San Francisco to Tokyo, the North Pacific is wider than the United States is wide. So you're telling me that you're going to have all of the North Atlantic and all of the North Pacific and then 11 time zones of Russia, and you're going to fit this on this map, on this picture of this globe? I'm sorry. And that's not even, you look at this
It's
picture.
insulting.
It's insulting. You can see Florida, right?
Yeah.
And then the Gulf, well, we call it the Gulf of America now, right? Or Gulf of Mexico. You can see the Yucatan Peninsula. You can see Cancun down there. But a little sliver of Central America is visible. All of South America is on the other side of the globe. And in fact, on this picture, both North Pole and South Pole are in the tropics on that picture if you were to flip it over.
Wow.
I kid you not. So
their
this is a
scale,
lie.
so even their scale and their modeling is not even, it doesn't make sense. There's so many things that you can see that the distances are just way out of proportion.
Yeah, they're
Wow.
total lies, and they're telling you that this is one of the best pictures of Earth from space. And if you
Yeah.
look at the other one, was in all of our science books. Okay, now get this. You can see that the two arrows on either side of the globe, right?
Mhm.
Towards, okay. Well, the Earth is spinning supposedly on an axis going towards the east, right?
Mhm.
So this is the apex of the day on this portion of the Earth. So on this particular day, Moscow never saw light, Paris never saw light, and London never saw light. It's dark. They never saw light on this day. Yeah, I'm just because it's spinning towards the east. And so it's just like you look at all these pictures and you're just going, oh my gosh, this is, it's all a lie. And I know this for a lot of people. A lot of people think I'm crazy. I lost my mind. I jumped off the deep end. I'm not the one who claimed to take these pictures. We know these pictures are a lie. They're not true. And when we look at the Nile River, you can verify this for yourself. You go back to that picture, scroll down, Matthew, you can see that picture of Lake Victoria. Go down another one more. No, go the other way.
Go other way.
Yeah. Keep going. You're right there. They're right here. Right. You can see the equator right there in Uganda. It goes right across Lake Victoria. So Lake Victoria is literally on the equator, and right there it says Victoria Nile. This is where the Nile River starts in Uganda, and that's where it starts. And I have no reason to lie to you. I have no reason to come on here and lie to you. Supposedly speaking for God, I would never do something like that. This is true. Lake Victoria starts at the equator, and we know all rivers flow downhill. There's nothing magical, nothing spooky, nothing mystical about, Lake Victoria and where the Nile starts, the White Nile. And so the White Nile, there's two main branches of the Nile. The Blue Nile goes into Ethiopia, but the White Nile comes all the way here to Lake Victoria on the equator, and this whole lake is then fed by all the huge mountains. Mount Kilimanjaro is near this area that's 20,000 feet. I don't think it feeds into this lake, but there are other big, tall mountains that feed this lake that are further south than the equator that you can see. So, I'm just saying that, a river can't flow downhill from the equator and reach 31.2 degrees latitude north all the way to, Alexandria, Egypt. I mean, if you're on a globe, this river should be flowing to Cape Town, not Cairo. That's the way I see it. If you're on a globe, but it's just simply flowing downhill because the Earth is flat.
Michael, would you like to weigh in on any of this?
Yeah. My perspective is, different. A long time ago, I lost my need to be right. I repented of it, actually. And, I don't know exactly what the shape of the earth is, but I do know that we live in a world of deception. And so discernment is key. And so when you find a liar lying to you about something, you should maybe look at that with a side eye. But there's no doubt that, a lot of the things that NASA puts out are deceptive. What does NASA mean? To deceive. So Werner von Braun actually put Psalm 19 on his gravestone. Werner von Braun being the father of rocketry, Saturn V rocket, and all that, part of Project Paperclip. It's a vast tapestry. There's a lot of threads that you could follow, but to weave a picture together, I guess we zoom out and look at it in terms of the Great Awakening itself and the revelation of truth coming out. So as about the time that Trump was coming down the escalator, Flat Earth was taken off on YouTube. About the time Trump was in the presidency and people started getting banned and shadow banned and censored in different ways. Well, Flat Earth was used as the flagship reason for that. We had Obama setting up the stage ahead of time saying, we don't have time for a meeting of the Flat Earth Society. That is to trigger a response when somebody wants to actually go search out the truth on this. They put that into a search engine. And what comes back is the Flat Earth Society, which is a straw man organization that's there to catch anyone searching out the truth, feed them propaganda, and make you feel like that is totally ridiculous. That could never happen, like a pie plate floating in space kind of an idea. That's not accurate in any way. It's just deception. As they rolled out more censorship and they used the Flat Earth as a reason for it, the debate got hotter because people want what they tell you can't have. And, for me, looking at things from the perspective that I've had over my life, for a long time before Jesus healed me and some of the things that happened to me, I viewed the world through a hypervigilant threat assessment perspective. And when the enemies are setting you up for later, they always leave breadcrumbs in the beginning. Things like Obama saying that back then kind of set the stage so that later on that could be played again and again and again, leading the fuel to the fire for everybody to search for this, which drives the awakening, which is the purpose. We're trying to get people to wake up to the truth that's been hidden from them for all these years. But if you tell them what it is, they will doubt the presentation of it. But if they have to uncover it and search for it, they will feel much more comfortable with the results they find. Now, there's disinformation out there with everything, but what he's saying biblically is totally accurate, 100% of it. The problem is the attention span of the audience has been shortened to such a degree that some of these young people could never fathom some of the things we're discussing here. They won't have the attention for it. So what can you do to give the proper worldview of discernment, not is it a globe or is it flat, but discernment to the younger generations. How do you get them to see things without looking on a screen for the answer, but to see with their own eyes? You can see with your own eyes the North Star has been there all this time. You can see with your own eyes the horizon is horizontal. It comes up to meet you eye level, no matter how high you go. You can climb a mountain, you can be in a plane. Horizontal horizon at all times at eye level. It raises up to meet you at eye level. For me, it's more of a eternal plane. And the circle that we see on the maps, I would liken that to when you have a child and you put them in a playpen. Okay. That child's world is that playpen, the Truman Show kind of thing, right? They're in the playpen. And until you graduate that child as a parent, you decide when to take them out of the playpen and give them a bigger play area. That's their entire world. So as you're expanding their world into the bedroom, into the backyard, onto the playground at school, into the world itself, as you're growing a child, right? God's trying to do that to us. So whether there's somebody that believes that we're on a globe or a flat plane, we have to meet those people where they are. And we have to meet them with love and an understanding rather than, getting into an emotional, heated debate over who's right. And that's what I see as the biggest thing with the globe argument, is that it comes with a built-in psychological trigger of defense for it. Now, as you look out across different topics that are out there, and you mention something, if they come after that, that means you might be over the target. Well, if you simply mention flat Earth to some people, they immediately fly into a rage. Now, they don't know why. It's a pre-programmed response that's been built into them, because you saying that the world is flat directly attacks their worldview of where they are and who they are. And so you're attacking them personally. So you have to have grace in the way that you discuss these things with people, and not make it a debate like, Greg Locke and what was the other pastor's name? It just
Pastor Dean Odell.
It turned into a wrestling event, basically. It just turned into a big spectacle, and that didn't help anybody on either side in any way at all. It just made it more of a crazy topic to talk about, and a divisive topic. Now, when division comes, that's always brought by the enemy, right? Anything that brings people together in discussion is always going to be the Lord, but then the enemy is always trying to divide. Well, there'll actually be pastors that point to the flat Earth and say it's a divisive topic, therefore the enemy is lying about it and is bringing it up to divide our church. Well, I believe that our minds are like parachutes. They only work when they're open. And we need to make sure that we take everything into account with what it is that we're thinking about and looking at. A simple question to the people that get upset when you bring up the topic only would be to just ask them to self-reflect for a moment and ask them why they're angry right now. If that explodes them even further, the conversation is over. You don't need to even go into anything with them at all. They're not going to receive any of your information. Their hearts aren't ready yet. Rather, you should comfort them and say, look, everyone has their own beliefs. There are people that believe different things. Maybe you should look into it yourself. Let them discover it on their own. Plant the seed. Let someone else water. Let God give the increase somewhere else. And the other thing, too, is you can ask one simple question to the hardline ball earthers or globers or whatever you want to call them. How do we have a positive air pressure in our atmosphere surrounded by a supposed vacuum of space without a barrier between it to contain the pressure and to keep the atmosphere from being sucked off the planet by the vacuum? Now, there's not been an answer to that yet that I know of that comes from any science or anyone anywhere. It's just gravity is the magic abracadabra word they use for that. They just say, well, because of gravity. That doesn't answer the question. It just makes you stop wanting the answer temporarily until you look deeper and you realize that that word is used to answer a lot of the questions that they didn't think of when they started this. Now, if we go back in history, most everyone believed it was a flat earth based on the Bible, and it was common knowledge. I think the globe earth model is only about 500 years old. I'm not sure, but it's not very old.
Well, it was interesting you say that. I before getting you guys on this show, I just wanted to be curious and see what Wikipedia had to say, because I have my perception of Wikipedia and what they are, and I know that they are some kind of an operation controlled by a three-letter agency of some sort connected to DARPA to kind of steer away narratives. But it did say that the Jesuit missionaries traveled the earth to change ancient beliefs of flat earth philosophies.
Right.
And it's like they sometimes use partial truths in that because maybe they have some kind of AI going through doing the deception for them because they don't have the human power to create deception on all of the Wikipedia, information that they post. But I thought that was interesting, especially when you understand secret societies and Jesuits and the Jesuit order.
In Hollywood,
Hollywood.
The wizards of Hollywood using their wands made of Hollywood to cast spells. They haven't been big on making a lot of sci-fi movies about another reality where it's an eternal plane and there are other continents outside the dome and all of these concepts. What they do is make sure that they show you plenty of planets and other worlds and Star Wars and Star Trek and you name it. Every other version of that has a consistency about it, about what to think about space. And Werner von Braun worked with Walt Disney to start that in the very beginning to promote NASA and space travel. And so from the very beginning, we've had, Jack Parsons was an occultist that helped develop, the rocket. We've got Werner von Braun tied to being a Nazi and the Paperclip Project. We've got, NASA and its black hole of funds that just go, who knows what we get for the money that goes there. They could definitely produce a very well-received movie over time, a series of movies over time that we would believe if it was presented to the kid in the playpen and told this is the way the world is. There's a globe in the classroom when they get there to confirm that. Every kid wants to be Luke Skywalker with his lightsaber and go from planet to planet and stop the evil empire. That's all metaphoric. And it's also tying into the very thing a while back. I don't know if you heard of this, but Jediism is actually trying to be a religion. And for some of these younger people that think they can be cats and dogs and whatever, that's something that would attract them. Thankfully, Disney has wrecked the franchise, so maybe they'll turn off some of the interest in that. But the idea of Star Trek, that's basically the United Nations in space. The idea of Star Wars is basically the spiritual battle in the heavenlies, right? And so, but with all that, you've got the planetary concepts put in there so that could form your basis for a one world religion. See, I would say that globalism itself is a religion, is the one world religion. The idea of globalism. Who are we fighting? We're fighting globalists. What do they want to do to us? Evil things. Okay. So it's very simple. If you just break down the simplicities of how people act when you bring something up, do they react in a loving, kind spirit, or do they have the spirit of anger? Well, that tells you, if you're into spiritual warfare, what you're dealing with there, dealing with the spirit of anger. Now, what the cause of that is and all those things, that can be dealt with if the person wants to heal of that or try to become better than they are and know that it's wrong to be angry just because someone brings up a topic. If they can see their own anger being triggered and wonder, yeah, why do I get angry? Then there's hope for them, and then they can maybe go on a search, and the Holy Spirit will lead them step by step to their own awakening that's individually made just for them. Because every one of us is different, and we all have to go through a different series of healing, really, of the trauma of being lied to and deceived, to be able to walk in that true light of Christ as he walks with us. And we embrace in a hug of light with him, and he's just there to enlighten us, show us how to be filled with his love so that it can overflow us onto others. And this debating process that's tied to this has turned it into almost a sideshow spectacle. And that was on purpose. That was narrative control. I would encourage you, John, if there are people in your life that may be triggered in some way based on this topic simply being brought up around them, that you would just pray for them to come to a curiosity about it, that something you may have said, one little thing, may be that seed that causes them to go search for something, and that search would lead them to the correct information, which that in itself is a miracle these days. As you search the internet, especially with AI out there now, what is to believe? Wikipedia is nothing more than a receptacle of information that can be changed generationally as we go. They can edit history for each generation as we go. As they say, what is it? Those who control the past control the future, and those who control the present control the past. And those kind of things ring true when information is shoved down a funnel into somebody, and then generations of people are grown into that information as being fact, and then later on in life they come to realize that was never the case. That could cause a different form of mental breakdown or spiritual dilemma, which leaves an opening for spiritual attack. And we're in a time now of spiritual war like never before, and I think that the flat earth topic is one of the main wedges into the world that helped drive the awakening to start, because it came on the scene pre-Q time, and then right after that, all the awakening and awareness and the lies of all the different things that have been going on started. And so that was sort of like the trickling before the flood, I would say. And so now, how do we encapsulate that in a meaningful way that we can enlighten others with it? I would say that's on a one-on-one individual basis. There's not something you can do on a massive audience scale that's going to be easy for everyone to hear. I used to listen to Rob Skiba. He took a boat and ran it across the Great Lake there to show a camera being on the Chicago skyline the entire time. There's things that you should not be able to see that you can see with a zoom camera if there was the so-called curve. And the way they will fight for their position to be right, to the point of not listening to your own arguments about anything. If you try to show logic and facts, the emotion takes over. And unless you can be in a logical step-by-step back and forth with somebody, if it gets emotional, I would just say, there's no point in going forward with it, because the emotion enters in, and anger inevitably is going to be that emotion, because you're attacking their worldview and their mind, and you must be the fool because they couldn't have been deceived. Like they say, it's easier to lie to somebody and get them to believe that lie than it is to get them to believe that they had been lied to.
Yeah, Michael, I appreciate your level-headedness, approaching this. Yeah, it is divisive. We know that from being in various churches. And I think the reason for it is we were all taught this, everybody. And in churches, you have a lot of different strata of people from different, economic backgrounds, as well as intellectual variations of academic learning. And and when like if you've been to college, everyone's had astronomy. For every you know you going through school, you always had astronomy taught to you one part of the year. And then even if you go to junior college or university, you're still given astronomy. So it's tied to the intellectual communities of the universities, and so it's a very, very tough thing to get over. um, and it does tend to be divisive, but that's not the reason to not look into it. Our reasoning should be based upon the biblical text. And that's why I created these things here, Michael, was do you have a biblical cosmology, or do you have a cosmology that you adopted from the academy? Is it man-made? Um, and so that's when through this whole thing here, all these 10 questions, if you go through them, I mean, do you believe, the sun is a star? Or do you believe the earth is a planet? If if you know what the word planetes means and where it comes from, like Jude, Asteris planetae out of Jude, well, it's the wandering stars, that make up, 5 days of the week, along with, the sun and the moon. um, a wandering star is not something, that these were the angelic beings that did not keep their own habitation but left them, according to Jude, verse 6 and verse 13 there. But God didn't, you think that, plant a star, a planet in the biblical worldview, in Jude, is a wandering star. That's the word. Wandering star means a planetary star. You could just, and you're thinking the word planet comes from the word to deceive, to wander, to err. So these are these stars that are wandering. They're not going around Polaris, as you were saying, right? Counterclockwise. They're not going around Polaris. They're the ones that, so this is what Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, along with the sun and the moon, makes up the 7 days of the week, according to the Roman calendar. Um, and so what I just wanted to make sure was that we need to have a biblical worldview. My advice to the listeners is that the Bible has a cosmology. And it begins on the first page of the Bible with a firmament. And that's why I designed all those questions. And so to work through it, then you'll understand how much of your cosmology has nothing, it's not founded in scripture. There's nothing in the Bible to inform you of whatever NASA taught you. And that's what I did with those slides. So that's all I wanted to present. I do thank Michael for, he's very well educated. He knows all the arguments, I could tell.
About the word planet that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
My perspective is I just see things as they are. And so I see the word planet, how it's spelled. And if you just simply remove the T, that's where you belong. And when you add the T, that makes it smaller and more manageable to make others believe than what it was previous. That's all I have to say there. You understand? The way it's spelled and the letter T makes all the difference.
Plain.
Oh, yeah, I know, but that doesn't have anything to do with the word's origin. It's from planao. Means to deceive or to wander or to err. That's what it means.
Right.
And so when it's applied to the stars, like Jude did it, the wandering stars, it means an erring, deceptive star that left its own habitation. And those are there were 5 things there that he was looking at, the false teachers. They're there's 5 things that he enumerated there, like a tree plucked up, twice dead, without fruit, right? Waving, like foam, raging waters of the sea, like foam. And these are what, and the last one was they're wandering stars. These are the false teachers that enter in our churches, and believe me, they're in our churches. They come into our churches and they're like wandering stars. And so that's where the word planet comes from. And so we've named Mars and Venus and Mercury. We were taught that they were actually terra firma, they were planets. But in the Bible, the word planet means a wandering, erring star.
Yeah.
So they put lipstick, NASA put lipstick on a pig,
Yeah.
and dress it up.
That's the origin of it. What I'm saying is truth always reveals itself in plain sight. And the fact that if you simply take the T off of that, you have plain, right?
Okay,
That
okay, I get that.
truth staring us in the face.
Interesting. Interesting. Question, like the stories about Admiral Byrd, Michael, when did that take place? Was that the 1800s?
No, that was just the end of World War II, I think, where the
Okay.
Nazis down to Antarctica. So
Hmm.
it's all speculative based on his diary, but apparently he went down and he found some things that were not out of the ordinary to report back on. He came back and was on, interviews and things like that, talking about what he'd seen there. But, he talked about a vast continent larger than America that had, be full of resources, which makes that doesn't make sense that there would be an international Antarctica treaty that doesn't allow people to go there if it's full of resources. I would say that there's something there that they definitely do go there for, and that is to investigate, try to find a way out, because the ones that want to escape this realm are those that won't escape as they leave in a natural way, going back to heaven with everyone else. Those that are followers of Jesus. The ones that are not followers of Jesus, they're looking for another way out. Truth often reveals itself right in front of us all of the time, and divisive topics and things like that are not something that you should shy away from. I was always a person that was not afraid to crush somebody's view of Superman, pointing out that he's an antichrist, the son of El who came to save the world and all. But the thing is that there's a series of coming in like waves, right, into the American psyche and the psyche of the world. COVID was a wave. Actually, COVID was more like a tide coming in, and the waves within it were all of the different regulations and mandates and different things that people went through in order to now become to the point of perspective we are now, where they have a little more discernment than they had. 9/11 was another tide coming in, where there was a series of waves of terroristic mindset and thinking and all that. That was to take us deeper into captivity. As the COVID comes along, they're trying to do their goals with how they release different things, or the media releases different information. That's for different goals. But I think God is working within all of these different methods of deception to reveal the truth. Just have it right there, shown to you right in your face. If you can see it, you can see it. If you have discernment, you see it right there. It's like a light, a flashing light. And then others that are searching for it diligently and looking right past it, can't see the forest for the trees. That occurs in many, many topics, many different formats of discussion right now. But emotion being triggered right now on all fronts is the biggest indicator of how mob rule can form in an instant over any topic, over anything. And then it's like a fire that just spreads in the wind through the brush, right? Like I say, lighting fires in the minds of men, right? Brush fires in the minds of men. That's supposed to be how the Holy Spirit and the Spirit of God moves. Well, the enemy tries to counterfeit that as well, but they use a digital format to spread that. And in the spirit, you can sense where the truth is right in front of you as they present a lie to you. You can see it. people that are watching on screens, they need to go get a definition and a source and track it back to this place and that place and every other thing. And that's fine to check all those boxes to give them confirmation on what it is that they want to get to the point of believing. But reality comes back in again, where that argument can just be turned sideways, where things like COVID, where we saw years of medical training and all of these people just be put aside for mandates that they were told, you have to do this now. And so all of the different things and what we call common sense, those things can be pushed aside in a heartbeat if a strong emotional topic comes along and just pushes the conversation in an emotional format, like Trump derangement syndrome kind of a thing, where it just kind of gets the emotion worked up and you see fuel being put on the fire all the time and no one trying to calm it down. And I feel like we're in a lull now where everything has calmed down in the flat earth discussions. And now it's time for the truth to kind of percolate back up from the top again without all the emotion coming in. Because I think that there's a younger generation that just straight up believes it's a flat earth and doesn't care what anyone's been taught before, because they're willing to throw out everything that someone's been taught before. And so that's not right either. You want to be able to take all the information, put it together, and discern exactly, what's there that you want to sort through and what do you want to keep and what do you want to get rid of. Without that diligent process of doing the work, it's easier to just say, oh, I believe this and I'm with this today, but then next week there was something else, and it's all based on what's on the screen that comes up for, the 15, 20-second little blurb that they get. And really that's what I see is, as we move forward into facts and discussions about science on different things, a lot of that's going to be lost on people that just don't have the attention span to absorb it. It's like they've been dumbed down to the point of not being able to understand. What I saw in high school, they don't see now. And I have no idea what, generations later we'll see, or if there'll even be a high school with AI being the teacher or something like that. So it's really what's important here is to look at how people get their information and what it is that makes them believe what they believe. And there's so many different varieties of answer to that question that I think the unification of those different belief systems all kind of just come together on their own. They coalesce, and as they come together on their own, a group of people with like-mindedness will sort of have these conversations about one topic, and it may be a bunch of globers making fun of flat earthers and how foolish they are, but they're all talking about it. See, now on the other side, there's the flat earthers bringing out all of the different facts and say, look, this makes no sense, that makes no sense, that makes no sense. And both sides are working to bring that awakening of the masses further and further along, because you can't jolt them awake. They'll want to roll over and hit the snooze button. They don't want to wake up from their dream.
Interesting.
Someone is
Michael. I guess I would say this. I hear what you're saying, and I have nothing. I don't have any disagreement with that, because what you're saying is true. But what does bring us together is the Bible, and we ought to look. Does the Bible have a cosmology? And it does. And so whatever we do believe, it should be tempered by the Bible. You don't allow any thought to enter your mind unless, every thought is to be taken captive to the obedience of Christ. And so I look at the Word, I look at the Bible, and so that's what I'm just, to me, the discussion ends with the Bible. And so, and I think you have been around the flat earth long enough. I was there. I was invited to be a speaker at Greg Locke's church. And then that whole thing went sideways. Like you said, we were all kicked out of the church. But that's how the discussion, and that's what you're referring to, is things like what happened over there in Mount Juliet last year. And the thing is that ultimately, when you listen to flat earthers, they quote the Bible. And if you listen to anything that doesn't have that view, they cannot open a Bible scripture. They cannot open anything, because their cosmology is not found in the Bible.
right.
It's not. It has no place in the Bible. That's why I did what I did, and I think that our coming together should be the word and should be the authority of the word and what it says. And we find ourselves that we're not willing to submit to that. But anyhow, that's all I wanted to say. And I really appreciate, Michael, your level-headedness. I could tell that you're fully, informed, and you're thinking through it. I just think the ultimately, that's why I went to the Bible, and I went to Psalm 19, because once you start entertaining what the Bible says, what the Son does, uh, to me, it's the discussion is like, well, wait a second. Am I going to submit my cosmology to the Bible? Is David right, or does God need to go down to hell to take astronomy lessons from Carl Sagan? I don't think so. Um, so I mean, to me, it's like either you're being informed from the academy or from, or from the Bible. And so
Yeah.
since I'm a biblical scholar, I just stick on the text. So that's
Yeah, that's your lane, and that's what really it creates simplicity, especially tying back to what Michael was talking about with the Gen Z and this young generation. They are literally rethinking everything that has been taught because they're poking holes in so many lies that because they're living through the Great Awakening at such a fast rhythm. They were born into it, and so they're almost open to God's voice coming to them. And that's what I pray for, is that God can speak directly to them and tell them that the truth is in the Bible, that's where they can find authenticity, and that's where they can find the root of everything. And so I'm just so blessed and thankful for both of you guys today, making the times in your Mondays to join with me on this podcast, on the Ultra MK podcast. And John, if anybody had any follow-up questions for you, I know you had mentioned you have an email address. What's that email?
My email is John Straz, half of my last name, JOHNSTRAZ as in zebra, at Hotmail.
Awesome. We'll make sure we put that down in the drop down below. Yeah, Dr. John Strazicich, also known as, Lisa calls you Johnny Straz. We are
Yeah.
so thankful for you to come on the show. Michael Ware can be found on both X and Truth Social at TruthFarmer777, where you can send him some more messages to kind of follow up from this call today. Folks, if you really enjoyed this podcast today, I encourage you to like, share, and subscribe. It only happens when people can share information with others, so that way we can all find truth and sort through the lies of this world. And I just want to thank God for this day. Thank you for giving me breath. Thank you for giving me sight and vision and mobility to get to all my appointments, Lord. I just appreciate all of the things you're doing to bring a new family to me and new friends to help make the show a success. And we just pray that in Jesus' name. And I wish you guys the best in your journey today.
It's our obligation to inform and alert the American people, to make certain that they possess all the facts that they need and understand them as well, the perils, the prospects, the purposes of our program, and the choices that we face.